So, if everything went well, we should be live now. I have no way of checking, but yeah, we're live. Welcome,
Awesome.
everyone, to another episode of Everything Outside Code, where I talk to amazing founders, creators, and CTOs like Ethan. Today, we talk about the hard part of shipping a successful product. And today, we're going to be focusing on community led growth, open source. We're going to be talking about Vaunt, the dev, what they do, Ethan's role, and how teams leverage either open source projects or communities to grow their product. And this is going to be a very fun conversation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. So I'm just going to go straight to it, straight to the man of the moment,
Awesome.
Ethan. Hi,
Yeah,
Ethan.
great to be
Welcome to
here.
today's show.
Thank you.
Hey, hi. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So thrilled to be on. And my name's Ethan Lewis. I'm the CTO of Vaunt. Have been with our parent company, Coachava, for a little over 8 years. And Vaunt is really what I would say is a strategic initiative that I get to own and have all of the funds of trying to take into market and grow. Vaughn itself is largely focused on how open source communities attract developers, how we can incentivize developers to join the platforms, contribute code to certain platforms, and we're hyper focused on what I would say are more pre VC backed open source companies, meaning you might not be able to do a something like a bug bounty program or a cash incentive to get users to discover your project and contribute. So a lot of our stuff is hyper focused on what we call just shedding light onto the contributors. Simple thank you goes a long way, a lot of ways, and we're really helping a lot of open source maintainers understand the mechanisms to identify that and also the mechanisms to thank their contributors.
Yeah, that's great. That was first a lot to unpack for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I like to dial it back a bit and talk about your role at
Awesome.
Vaunt. So what you do, and
Yeah.
then we could progress from there. So what you do at Vaunt? What does your day to day look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I'm the CTO of both Coachava and Vaunt. With Vaunt, I get a little bit more agency around what I get to do. I uh, run, anywhere from the marketing stack, the sales stack, to the development and release of the product. So we're a small team. We
Hmm.
have three full-time employees on that product, including myself. And our days vary, but that's how we like it. We like the diversity and
Yeah,
the workload. And what I would say is I enjoy probably most getting in the code and really starting to implement the product directly after I start talking with the customers. So we're a big fan of product led growth and customer
hmm,
engagement. And that's what the normal day to day is: seeking feedback
yeah,
and getting to implementing.
yeah. That's cool. I love the sound of product led growth. I get
Yes,
I get really
absolutely.
hyped once I hear that because it truly is really dynamic. You talked about
Yep.
marketing stack. That piqued my interest.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Yeah, so I try to do my best at understanding where specific categories of leads could come from, understanding both for our customer base so we can help them grow their communities. It's a part of our core role as a company, but also doing the same for us. Obviously, we're a product that needs to grow and get an adoption curve around the community that is supporting us and integrating it into various products. We really believe in more of a network effect for Vaunt to be successful. And that's really where I'm focusing on the marketing side. So whether or not I'm helping with technical blogs, doing some content writing, or doing more qualified lead, generation and understanding of some of our key customer profiles, and then engaging with those customers. That's really kind of the holistic view of the marketing side for me.
Yeah, this feels like the first time I'm meeting a CTO that also has like really good marketing skills.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
yep, evolving every day, but certainly I love to learn and I love to pick up new skills. So I've been in a
Yeah.
full inundation mode of both sales and marketing over the last, call it 6 to 8 months.
Wow. That's amazing, man. And is it fun?
It
Did you
is.
find it
It's
totally
different.
different?
It's totally different, and
Yeah.
I think for me. it's a really healthy thing, I think, for a lot of engineers to experience, because I've always been on the opposite side. Either, hey, we need this because of X to drive growth in our product, and
Hmm.
whether or not you take that at face value or not, sometimes it's hard to hear as an engineer. Now I feel like I understand it a little bit more. I can understand
Yeah.
firsthand what those leads are coming in, why they matter, how it could drive direct growth in our product. And
Hmm.
while we're a small team, it's very, very rewarding to hear a problem for a customer and have the capabilities to go deliver on it, and then test that in market to see if it actually had the effects that you think it did.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good one. So you do full life cycle, get feedback, you get
Exactly.
like some ideas, and then you can implement like whatever and test,
Mhm.
whatever you've done if it's actually driving revenue growth, not just overall like
Correct.
product adoption. Yeah.
Yep,
That
absolutely.
is that is fantastic. You mentioned something that also piqued my interest again.
Yeah.
Network effect. You said,
Yep.
how have you intentionally maybe tried to drive that? What are some strategies that
Yeah.
you've employed?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously, our strategy at whole is to try to do various test and confirm methodologies. But what I would say is, again, we're hyper focused on what I would say is the broader open source ecosystem, where we're not necessarily dealing with large organizations that have funding, right? So the thought process behind Vaunt is, it's really more like a social platform, and just like the early days of Facebook or others, you really wanted that exclusivity to draw other
Hmm.
users in, or that value add, that sense of community that you can really drive for. So one of the strategies that we've taken is really try to identify two different market groups or target customer profiles for us. On one camp, we have the developer. They're interested in showcasing off contributions, discovering open source organizations, and really showing their skill set across the ecosystem. On the other hand, you have open source maintainers or organizations that really just want help maintaining their projects and growing an overall sense of community with
Hmm.
themselves. So we've been intentional about how we go about getting those, and we really do believe in that network effect, that if our developer pool grows, organizations want to be more attracted. If our organization profile grows, a lot of developers will benefit from those organizations enabling some of the Vaunt capabilities that we offer.
Yeah. I once spoke to some dude at Zillow. I think it's
Mhm.
the CEO. Someone met him in Atlanta. And I typically
Mhm.
have like this, okay, I wouldn't call it an egg and chicken situation, but when you
Sure.
have like a two body problem, I would call
Yes,
it. So you have,
100%.
yeah. So when you have like two different categories of users,
Yep.
and you're trying to drive network effect, how do you
Right.
go at this? And his
Yep.
advice was, you pick one
Yeah.
user group,
Yep.
and you just go at it. And when you're successful, then you face the other. Would you say that's the
Yep.
same strategy you employ, or you were
Yeah.
still, testing it out and shifting your effort across both?
I think what we've found is more or less that. And the focus area for us largely is on the maintainers and the organizations. And it's not to say that we're not focused on the developers and communities themselves, but it's that
Hmm.
they have less of the problem state that we're after, right? Organizations are the ones that really want to find quality contributors, find ways to reward and attract those contributors, and then also
Hmm.
promote additional contributions within their communities. Um,
Yeah.
not another really hard problem that they have to solve is the open source space. I think the saying is, open source is eating the world, just like software is. It's coming
Yeah.
increasingly hard for organizations to become discovered within a GitHub environment, if you would, for open source contributions. So that has been our large focus. It's been shifting
Hmm.
away from, I would say, the two strategy to try to grow both, but really skewing towards how can we enable some of those problem states for organizations and maintainers, that hopefully
Hmm.
do start to attract the developer communities. And like I said, we're very test and see, and
Yeah.
we'll adapt as we can if those
Yeah.
strategies don't work.
Yeah. I love the agility, but also like the focus still having like
Mhm.
some North Star. We want to help organizations, but we're open to testing out how things go. So in concrete terms, what would you say is the value proposition of Vaunt? So there's discoverability, there's
Yep.
incentives, but why do organizations or developers? come to you?
Yeah.
What problem
Yep.
do you wake up in the morning and like, this is what I'm going to solve today, or this is what I'm
Yep.
solving with Vaunt?
Yeah. So, Vaught's core meaning is really how do you boast about contributions, and that's the core problem that we're trying to shed light on. Being an open source contributor myself, there's a magnitude of different experiences that you go through when you're contributing to open source projects. Um, Being rewarded, or at least a thank you for the contribution, is the simplest
Hmm.
thing that organizations can do, and that's really where
Hmm.
our ethos is. Right, we really want to
Yeah,
figure out how can we highlight contributions to projects, and how can we build that more or less open source contribution footprint based off of that ethos.
yeah, that's cool. So, um, shifting to a bit of the marketing bits. What are some of like the marketing efforts that you've tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Especially
Yeah,
within the realm of, we are looking at open source projects, and open source projects typically do not have maybe a lot of money. And
yeah,
you're looking for
absolutely.
folks without like VC funds. So
Right.
uh what's sort of like your approach to marketing and growth? What's worked and what hasn't?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the really hard things that we identified is dev tooling and selling to developers is hard in general. I've
Yeah.
worked in a few different domains. It's a very difficult space. Stepping into the open source space, it's even more difficult just because of what we mentioned, the lack of funding in a lot of those cases. So
Hmm.
some of the strategies I think on our end that we've really struggled with are really how do we get our own internal visibility and brand awareness on what we're trying to do to hopefully
Hmm.
make these maintainers more successful, even if monetization isn't their core principle. We have a number of, again, like free tier offerings that we're trying to capture and really grow that network effect around. But it's hard to get brand awareness. So, in the past, that was very targeted developers. We were doing a lot of analysis on GitHub to identify projects that were growing, projects that may not have a high diversity in contributors, more or less ideal GitHub projects or open source projects that we felt Vaunt could help accelerate into a growth area.
Hmm.
Um, Very hard and time consuming to generate those leads, even if
Yeah.
they are truly what we believe are quality opportunities. So,
Hmm.
on the second side, what I would say we did is we took a less direct approach, and we said, what are the mechanisms in the space that really drive, again, this core ethos of a lot of contributions and excitement around open source technology. And believe it or not, one of the main vessels that we see a lot of growth in are hackathons. So whether or not it's a company that's trying to do a hackathon where they need to reward their users or promote their
Hmm.
users or drive more contributions to a certain domain that they're trying to do, that has been a really, really solid vessel for us to tag team with some pretty big brands and promote what they're trying to do, and also promote where Vaunt fits in and helps facilitate some of those key metrics for attracting and celebrating contributions to open source projects.
Yeah. So branding and then just lead gen. So
Yep.
with lead gen, it's generate the leads and then cold outreach
Yep.
to them.
100%. Yep.
Oh, oh
Very
man,
hard.
that must have been difficult. I can imagine.
Yes. Yep. Very, very
Yeah.
hard. And again, you know, the hard part is a lot of these open source companies, they're not individual brands themselves. It's usually a
Hmm.
maintainer that has a project that's become successful, and they don't necessarily have the funds or the desire to grow it much more. So it is a
Yeah.
challenge, especially in the cold outreach world, to
Hmm.
drive that interest. So again, we've kind of pivoted to more of the hackathon support. But then, I would say outside of cold email, the other way that we really see doing a lot of lead gen is open source contributions ourselves, whether or not it's
Hmm.
with the technology that we're leveraging, or promoting our own open source projects to try to
Yeah.
grow awareness and show how we can be effective in market. So we've done a lot
Yeah.
of what I would say. I don't know if it's a full term or not, but I typically call it technical leads, which mean we're leading by what we feel is where we fit. Coding to open
Yeah.
source projects, technical blogs, producing content that others can benefit from an overall tech ecosystem standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, now you mentioned content, I'm like, I get excited.
Yes.
I get
Yep.
excited, I get excited about content and really creating at least useful stuff that folks
Yeah.
would you know could solve a problem or two for them. And I like the idea of contributing to a project, and then that just gives you an in because you get some
Yeah.
credibility from that. Also, because if selling to developers are difficult, I feel like open source maintainers are probably going to be like the hardest because they're like
Oh yeah.
engineers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely.
like, yeah, I can just imagine any like top open source contributor or the author of a library, and you're trying to sell them, not even sell them, like reach out
Right.
cold outreach. They just assume you want to
Yep.
sell them something, and
Yep.
it's it's a hard no. So I
Yep.
also see like branding playing a huge part in what
Huge.
you do. Yeah, so it just brings you get
Mhm.
like that demand gen. Basically, you
Yep.
get folks coming to you instead, which is great overall.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that sounds like a good strategy. So when we talk about building brand, right?
Yeah.
What
Mhm.
channels do you currently go at? Um, Social
Mhm.
channels where?
Yeah. So, a lot of the times we found success working with X or Twitter, doing a lot of our posting there on either spotlighting contributors that we're helping through some of the font capabilities that we have, or also just our own blogs and releases. And we also leverage a lot of the subreddits. So, looking at Reddit as a marketing platform, that is one of, I would say, our more tailored focus. I could be biased, but it's also where a lot of devs hang out. So, what we're typically doing is joining a lot of the tools and technology that we built Vaunt with from an open source standpoint, and showing use cases that we've made public on how we've leveraged that technology from more of a use case scenario, and then what features it's unlocked with Vaunt. So examples of that would be like specific database technology that we've picked, and what we built on top of the database, and how it's serving our own customers as well. And then finding those other sub Reddit posts to go and try to promote there.
So I've probably spoken to like what two, three developer advocates in the last month that are struggling with Reddit. They
Sure.
know it's the
Yep.
place developers hang out. They've
Yep.
tried, but it's just not working. And I feel like sometimes it's like easier said, easier said
It
than
is.
done. Everyone
Yep.
is like, go be helpful, right?
Yep.
But the folks on Twitter are hostile. The folks on Reddit, they're like all out war. It's
Yep.
like where,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
absolutely no bullshit. You
Yep.
come correct or not, right? So it's
100%.
interesting to see that Reddit is a channel
Yep.
that's worked for you. And if I get you correctly, you said going with like use case approach, pick a
It is.
technology, and then probably like build something with it, and then showcase, hey, here's something I did. And I guess you have to be as genuine
And
about
authentic.
it as
Exactly.
possible and authentic
100%.
about it.
Yep. And that's our approach, to be honest. What we see those channels as are great brand awareness channels, but we're not
Hmm.
going there as expecting leads to our platform. We're expecting helpful content that we can use to promote our tools as a secondary benefit, right? The
Hmm.
first benefit is shining the spotlight on the open source tools that we've leveraged, or the tool technology that we're trying to promote through Reddit. Secondarily is capture any of that exhaust from those initiatives. And I think as an engineer at heart, I like writing about those topics more than
Hmm.
sometimes I do the business outcomes that they might drive. And I think that
Yeah.
works very well in the Reddit platform, right? Where you can start to see a lot of that growth and a lot of that overall authentic approach that you're taking to content generation.
Hmm. And I think ultimately this still drives like leads, like folks build
Absolutely.
trust, and they eventually want to check out like your product and who's this
100%.
person, where
Yep.
they coming from, right? I like
Absolutely.
that. I like that. I like that. Going with like brand awareness, not lead generation. I don't want to get conversion from this. I just
Right.
want to talk about this thing as genuinely and as authentic as I can. If they come, they come. If they don't, yeah, that's all right as well.
Exactly. Yep. And
Yeah.
obviously those strategies are difficult for every company, but I think specifically in the dev tooling space, that's one
Hmm.
of the core takeaways that I've been learning is, you almost have to do the build it and they will come approach, and you need to stay true to what your passion is around what
Yeah.
you're trying to produce, and make sure that that promotion is top of mind versus the business outcomes that are driven. And not everyone
Yeah.
has that time to sit and stew in that. Luckily for us, Vaunt being more of an incubation of our parent company, we do get a little bit of that time to allow us to slow our growth and really specialize on what we're trying to achieve within the market.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful because I do know a number of companies they have like a pressure from a proper developer marketing organization to we need to drive leads, we need to grow our pipeline, we need to get signups, we need to activate users towards like some feature and get them to pay eventually. And they don't have all the
Absolutely,
time in the world.
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it sounds like everything's going well. What's not going well? What are some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment?
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time on the marketing and sales front, and I think I think there's a small niche market that we're operating in, which is again what I would call is like a developer advocacy or developer community platform. That's kind of the
Hmm.
market that we're sitting within, and I think for the reasons that we've mentioned around selling to developers, getting brand awareness, being technical in your approach, being authentic in your approach, those are very slow growth mechanisms. And when we start to look at what our overall marketing strategy is, it's typically invest more into that category, which is difficult, right? We can only write so many, we can only come up with so many tools and techniques to use and promote. And we don't want to also be negative about how we're introducing certain technology to our platform, just so we have some ideas and content around how
Hmm.
to grow it. Um, so, I think for us, as much as it's working, I would say equally, we definitely have a problem with where should we invest our marketing dollars and how should we grow at a faster pace, right?
Hmm.
And again, some of the success I would say in that is we don't have the marketing budget to go do ad campaigns or brand awareness campaigns. We haven't really sought after that. So we've
Hmm.
really been intentional about saying, here's the growth that we're receiving. We're a little bit north of about 400 customers, and we're engaging with them directly, and we're really using them to guide us on where we need to be investing. We certainly have our roadmap, what we think we need to be doing, where we want to go, and that's
Hmm.
constantly being calibrated by saying,
Hmm.
hey, our marketing may be slow, but our customers, they have a lot of experiences within this space. Many of our customers are, call it, 2 to 300x larger than us from a open source
Hmm.
community standpoint, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that we can just soak in and really learn from. So I would say marketing is probably the thing that I wouldn't say is going bad, but certainly would love to see it
Yeah.
go more. And I wish there was more levers that we could pull. But we're pretty patient in the current form.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, everyone struggles with marketing. I mean, not everyone
Right.
struggles, but marketing could be better. Could
A
always be
hundred
better.
percent.
Even
That's how I
Apple is
see it.
still marketing till tomorrow, so, so they can always
Exactly.
they can
Exactly.
always do better. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's really that's cool. So we talked about your challenges, and then I started to think about the challenges your clients have, right? So
Yeah.
what are some of like the I like the this brings me to the hard parts of community-led growth,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
they're building a community of open source contributors for their products. What are some of like
Yeah.
the challenges they face? And this could be outside what they could solve with Vaunt, but just in
Sure.
general,
Yeah.
what are the things you've seen?
Yeah. So, I think again, we're kind of in a niche market of the open source world, and that's a growing ecosystem, obviously. But I think one of the things that really surprised me is, and you've mentioned it, um, a lot of these open source organizations are looking at open source to be a vessel for community led growth. And
Hmm.
the reality is, they're getting tremendous pressure from VCs on why they're investing in open source, right?
Yeah.
And so, I would say one of the challenges that a lot of our customers face is why open source? Why did we go open source to do this, this awesome idea that we had? What was the reason for it? And, a lot of times these companies are started by technical founders or engineers, and they
Hmm.
really do believe in the open source ecosystem, but they struggle with developing those metrics to be able to take to their investors and say,
Hmm.
here are the positive growth areas that we see directly attributed from making that decision to open source our project.
Yeah.
So obviously that's something that we focus on. That's something that we try to lean in with our customers and better understand. And it's really unique case by case depending on what market they're in.
Hmm. Yeah. I totally get it. Sounds like attribution. That's the
Absolutely. Yep.
that's the problem here, right?
Hmm.
That's the yeah. I think that's the hardest part. Also because it's hard to measure stuff,
Right.
right? It's
It
yeah.
is.
It's
Yeah.
it's just really difficult to measure stuff. Uh, I had him like everyone these days. Literally, is if you have an idea or if you're short on ideas, you look for an established product to make an open source
Right.
version of it.
Yes,
That's like
absolutely.
bread.
Yep,
That's the bread and
absolutely.
butter these days. So I had the same
It
thought. I'm
is.
like, this is like huge product, really large, doing a lot of
Right.
a lot of revenue. They have a lot of customers. There's also a lot of friction. They're becoming a really
Yep.
large company. So it'd be nice to simplify it. Take Calendly and Carl.com. Take away
Absolutely.
some of the
Yep.
unnecessary features. Just focus on what works, and then
Hmm.
make it open source as the edge.
Right.
And then I talked
Yep.
to my co-founder, and I'm like, "Hey, I want to build this thing, and I want to make an open source version of this thing." And he asked me,
Right.
"Why open source?" I'm
Right.
like, "Because
It's
there
a
isn't
good.
an open source version."
Right.
He's like,
Exactly.
that's not enough. That's not enough
No.
reason to
Yep.
make an open source
Absolutely.
one. And I figured if I try to go with, oh, this is going to bring us revenue, it's going to help with like brand awareness, and we're
Right.
going to be like taking a corner of the market. And he's like, don't you think we'll be taking the wrong corner of the market because
Sure.
we're trying to make an open source version. If we're looking at this from like a revenue play, we're not getting folks that would bring in revenue because open source
Right.
users want to self-host it elsewhere. They're not going to pay
Most
you.
likely. 100%.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, uh, but then I see a lot of like open source alternatives to popular products, and
Right.
they're some of them are probably making money. I mean, I'm not in any of these companies
Yeah.
to know, and I
Yep.
just feel like maybe it's right, but then I know I haven't seen like a public report of
Sure.
how they're
Yeah.
doing,
Of the
like a public
companies.
case
Yep. Right.
for for these things. So so far I just shelved that because I haven't justified like why it should
Yeah.
be it should be open source aside it being
Right.
like a brand play.
Exactly. I think brand is one of the main reasons, especially if you're building tools for developers. It's very hard to not do
Hmm.
an open source play these days, in my opinion. Like
Yeah.
proprietary software is very hard to sell into, especially if it's in the dev developer space and large. The other thing though that I think we're typically seeing, um, at least in the technology space, is open source is one brand, and then two, becoming huge with trust and transparency.
Hmm.
I believe Switzerland just announced that a lot of the government tooling needs to be open source. They want to be able to read the code, even if they're paying for a hosted solution or not. There's a lot of
Hmm.
really unique cases with that. And obviously, these are the ethoses around open source technology in general. But coming up with that right business strategy and deciding
Hmm.
where you fit. Is it a free product? Is it a paid product? Is it an open
Hmm.
source viewability, but not commercial license alternative? There's a lot of
Yeah.
challenges when deciding to do
Yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah. There definitely is. So does Vaunt solve attribution for community led
Yes,
growth for open source
yeah,
projects?
that's one of the core areas that we're looking at. I would say it's more. So I mentioned our parent company, Coachava, is what's incubating. Our space is in measurement and attribution for marketing
Hmm.
campaigns. So
Okay.
very related to how we can try to drive some of the attribution for
Hmm.
developer advocates and showing that open source benefit. That's certainly what I would say is our long term vision behind where we would like to take some of Vaunt, and it falls into really three categories. The first
Hmm.
is highlighting developer contributions. That's where I would say we're at. The second is discoverability, making sure that there's tools and techniques to understand what projects exist, how you find them, how you can find where you might be able to contribute, et cetera. And then the third
Hmm.
is really around that attribution play that you're mentioning around understanding the benefits of open source, how to increase certain capabilities or KPIs within the open source community to show long term sustainability for open source projects.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So I guess anyone that's struggling should check out Vaunt. that's
Yeah,
uh
absolutely.
that's
Yep.
that's step one.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's what we would love to start with, and being a scrappy group, that's the core. So
Yeah.
a lot of our stuff, like I said, is really around the spotlighting contributors right now, and we just
Hmm.
launched some really cool things around discoverability of projects and insights, community health scores, things like that for open
Yeah.
source works. Mhm.
Yeah. That's cool. Something you mentioned earlier that I liked was contributing to hackathons. Are they the
Yes,
only developer programs that you sort of approach when it comes to growth?
yeah, it's a great question. I would say currently figuring out how we can help sponsor some of these hackathons are what our focus is. So a lot of the times, again, we're engaging with these organizations that may be looking for how they make a hackathon reward system. Right, top five contributors get X
Hmm.
digital prize or something. So that's probably the main area that we're focused on when we're looking at hackathons.
Hmm.
Outside of that, what we've also been doing are just some community days where we're trying to do more internal community growth, meeting with our contributors of our own projects, users of Vaunt, showing them what our roadmap is, engaging with what questions they have, maybe looking at some of the issues that could be coming up and figuring out if we can help solve some of those issues early on. But it's really just
Hmm.
about keeping that engagement up with our developers outside of how we can support some of our existing users through hackathons.
Yeah, that's great. What so you've probably seen hackathons that have done well than
Yeah,
those that have like absolutely failed. What would you say makes a great hackathon and a bad one?
yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it, the short answer is a lot of it falls back to our earlier discussion around brand awareness and just marketing in general. Luckily for us, we're on the flip side of the hackathon, meaning most of the hackathons that we see go positive have their own brand recognition around it.
Mm.
Hacktoberfest by DigitalOcean is a really big one that everyone knows about. Some of the Google hackathons or Summer of Code projects are other ones that we help support. I mean, then individual brands that are running their own hackathons certainly are areas that we help. A lesser known hackathon that has not taken that time to grow and foster their brand to get the overall eyeballs needed to really push what their hackathon represents. Those are the areas that are challenging, and where we're trying to lean in and help is say, um, how can we help do non-monetized rewards or spotlights for the contributors that are engaging with your hackathon? So
Yeah.
that could be social shout outs, that could be digital achievements, it could be discovery of repositories that are participating in the hackathon, etc. But it's really about how we can help try to bolster some of their brand awareness.
Yeah. I mean, I think I need to write like Vaunt down for
Yeah.
ourselves
Yeah.
at Hack Mamba, and I need to come talk to you
Yes.
because I've
Yeah,
I've organized
absolutely.
a lot of hackathons as a developer
Mhm.
advocate and just being in streets doing everything and
Yes.
anything, right? And I've seen hackathons go well and those that
Yep.
do not. The brand plays like a huge part. But then when you work at a
Huge.
content company like Hack Mamba, we create technical content for software teams
Right.
and we care about GTM of software teams and
Right.
especially those who develop products in general. A
Mhm.
number of times they come to us with, hey, we want to organize a hackathon, right?
Sure.
and I'm like, okay, the signs are not looking good,
Yes,
right? The
absolutely. Yeah,
signs, the signs are not looking good. First assessment, not looking good. But what can we
right.
do? Like, what's
Yep.
possible? It's not our primary like area of like expertise, but there
Sure.
could be something here. And running a hackathon where you have a lot at stake, so you have like
Yes.
monetary rewards. It's
Right.
more, I would say, painful when you roll it out. It fails. You're like, we
Right.
lost money. We
Yeah,
lost,
absolutely.
especially for startups and smaller teams. Like you don't want to lose money. That's
Yes.
the bare
Yep.
minimum. Is
Absolutely.
we don't lose money. So I do know teams are um, they're really interested in what are some ways they could incentivize
Yeah.
participants that could even transcend the feeling they would get, the participants would transcend beyond getting like monetary rewards
Yes.
from the hackathon. But what those things are, putting them together, I think a lot of teams struggle with that.
Yeah.
And if they come to me, I guess I'll just like I'll talk to you, find
Yeah.
someone on the
Yeah.
team,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
we definitely thought to we'll figure that out.
Awesome.
That's an that's a good one. Thanks for the help
Yeah.
you render us in the future. I
Yes.
should add
Exactly. Yep.
that.
Absolutely.
I-
Would love to support for sure.
yeah, I should add that. So looking at open source communities in
Mhm.
general, right? Like you said, there projects are drowning on GitHub. It's like
Right.
open source project, but it's not like open source projects 10 years ago where
Right.
they have like the really big guys, the really big like languages and stuff that's open source, and then there's like the smaller guys coming up, and you come up, you build something great, you get notable, you stay in the spotlight for a while,
Right.
right?
Right.
So what are some of the problems that or what are some of the gaps? What's missing in open
Yeah.
source
Yeah.
at the
So
moment?
again, from my point of view, a lot of my background is helping mobile marketers grow their app distribution, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of things start with the app stores. And what I would call an app store is GitHub, right? So taking it
Hmm.
into more of the open source and developer focus, GitLab, GitHub, anywhere that we're having a lot of these open source projects hosted, a lot of the techniques apply. One of the simple ones is a lot of people don't run search campaigns for their open source projects, right? Meaning, if I search in Google or Perplexity or something like that, open source queuing technology. If you haven't tagged your repository correctly, if you haven't set up topics, if you haven't done the exercises around what GitHub does from an SEO standpoint on the READMEs, those projects really struggle to get identified by search engines. So
Hmm.
one area that we've been really hyper focused on is how can we help organizations that want to be discovered operate
Hmm.
within those capabilities around discoverability. Search campaigns or search keywords like traditional SEO or search engine optimization are certainly some of the thought processes that we've had. We offer a pretty large search index of GitHub repositories, where I think that's a strategy that we would be looking at long term is how do we really help identify quality search terms? How do we identify certain search terms? How do we align a contributor to a certain project and really hyper focus on that user journey of discoverability for open source projects?
Yeah. So that's a gap, I would say,
Absolutely.
discoverability. What's seeing this gap, if there is, say, there is an open source author, library
Yeah.
author, or technology author currently listening to this stream,
Mhm.
and they have to make one change to improve their
Yep.
discoverability, what should they do?
They should go in to where they're hosting their source code, make sure that they're properly setting up their readmes, and as well as all of the topics for their repository. So specifically on something like a GitHub, making sure the tags of that repository align with the more macro theme that they're solving. Again, sticking with that queuing technology trend, even labeling it something like Q, or leveraging even other brand terms like Redis or PubSub or something else like that to help drive the
Hmm.
awareness to that project is certainly really key. A lot of that data is picked up by popular search engines automatically from GitHub itself and can be helpful in trying to get more organic search discoverability for the project. So
Yeah,
that would be my number one advice.
that's fantastic. Thanks. This sounds like a lesson in like keyword planning
Yeah,
for SEO
yeah,
on open
it's
source
very
projects.
similar.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. And I think, a lot of the stuff that we've realized is, with a lot of our open source projects, the more you can do to reduce the cognitive load once a user hits that page, meaning how quickly do they know what your solution does? How quickly can they download it and use it in their project and
Hmm.
understand that it relates to their problem? That's the one of the core ways to not only get more eyeballs on the project but also more contributors to the repository. So taking that time to really work on good readmes and tagging the repository really do pay off.
Yeah. Great readmes, type repositories properly. That's that's great. So
Mhm.
you see the numbers, you see the data, you see a list from your customers and users. What would you say currently is the state of open source contribution? I don't know. Are
Yeah,
people contributing more to open source? Is it growing? Is it like shrinking? Are we seeing non-commercial open source or free open source? And
yeah.
how does that like? Are we seeing more of that as against
Yep.
commercial open source, or are we seeing like a rise in commercial open source? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I think there's really two trends, and there's an awesome report that is published in January every year around the state of open source. That this year, when that was published, the gist was 94% of technical co-founders or engineers within the space report that they are investing in either using or open sourcing their own technology, and that's a pretty big jump in the overall ecosystem. um, not only that, I think what we're seeing is growth in almost every vertical. Things like AI being open source, things like database technology being open source, core infrastructure components, dev tooling, etc. A lot of that is skewing more towards open source. On the So I would say open source is growing very much so. A lot of contributors going into those projects from
Hmm.
more of that organic growth side. On the flip side, we have a lot of legacy open source projects, and what I mean by legacy, that's probably the wrong term, but I would say we have a lot of mature open source companies that are trying to understand how they become profitable, and that is where you're seeing a lot of these companies switch to commercial licenses, for better or for worse. So a lot of free community editions, a lot of commercial license are growing. The core thing that I like about it, to be frank, this is a little bit of a tin hat moment, but I see a really cool synergy between the self-hosted versions of open source and the commercial
Hmm.
licensing, where SaaS is probably more at risk than open source software as a service. We're starting
Yeah.
to see more and more self-hosting or single hosted solutions where commercial licenses or enterprise licenses are still really valuable, but we don't
Hmm.
necessarily have to pay for the SaaS
Yeah.
operation. The cool part of that is, for open source companies at least, look how many flocked to a SaaS version of what they just built. That's not the money generator. That's the
Mhm. Yeah.
support and operational cost uh,
Yeah.
trap. Is what I would
Yeah.
say. So the gist is, I think we're starting to discover more approachable ways to monetize open source, even if it does take a more commercial approach. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really healthy thing stepping out of some of the SaaS world.
Why do I feel like we're going back to like software licenses where you buy you buy a
Absolutely.
license and you put
Yes.
the software on your server and you use
Yep.
it. We're going back 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think some of it is privacy regulation, some of it's optimization of compute, data migration, you name it. But I do think that is a trend to at least pay attention to. Whether or not it fully happens or
Hmm.
not, I think will
Yeah.
be telling. But I think it's a really cool thing to see for sure.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I'm keeping an eye on that trend, and I'll definitely
Yeah.
keep an eye out for that report that you see comes
Yes.
out every
Yes.
every January
Every year.
because I'm really
Yep.
interested. I want to see how pricing, especially for open source
Yes.
projects and support,
Yes.
how that changes. Because I do know that is a huge driver for the creation of more open source projects. And
Absolutely.
if authors are incentivized to keep building, I mean, they can pay their bills. They know they're not going to
Right.
be homeless building an open source project, and then
Yep.
they want to keep doing it. So I'm interested in the financial part of it. What are the benefits to them
Yes.
aside like status and that sort of thing. So
Yep.
uh to sum it all up, why should
Mhm.
anyone, we've looked at, what could go wrong, what could go really well. In
Yeah.
summary, why should anyone who has a product have a community attached to it?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
I think going back to the product led growth side, I think as I become more seasoned in my career, I think it's all about identifying where you can calibrate some of your ideas and understand where your problem state really is for your project. A lot of times, I think we fall into a trap of self ideation and self validation, and in my opinion, communities are one of those really good ways to identify some of your champions within market, how you can generate some of that social network effect, getting more users to love and use your product. And then selfishly, there's just so much that you can learn from your users and the community that's growing around your brand on where to take the next step for growing your existing product and encouraging more adoption of the tool. So that's the core reason why I think a community investment's very highly recommended.
Yeah, yeah, improving ground. That's what it sounds
Mhm.
like.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
to prove stuff and have fun. I would say
Yes,
communities are great for
yes,
that as well.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. So, what's the best way? I guess Vaunt.dev. That's how to get
Yeah,
started with Vaunt. And
mhm.
what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah. So we have a Discord. You can find that on our main site as well as on our GitHub. I'm available on X as well as GitHub, LinkedIn. Those are all really easy ways to get a hold of us. And I would say join our community. We love to banter and ideate. And Vaunt's a pretty easy tool to get started with, and we'd be happy to help assist with some of that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Any last
Yeah.
words, Ethan, before we call you wonderful day?
No, not. I want to say thank you for hosting and the great conversation. It was awesome questions, and this was a blast. I really appreciate the invite to come on.
Yeah, thank you so much also for coming
Awesome,
on. This is one of like the
absolutely
better conversations I've had on this stream.
awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. And to everyone listening, thanks for sticking around for listening to this. I hope you find there's a lot of gems in this stream. If you're listening on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It's somewhere down here. 38 episodes in, and I still don't know where it is. I just know it's it's somewhere down here. Hit the subscribe button and the like button so you know when next we go live. And that is today's episode of Everything Outside Code. Have a wonderful evening.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you. You too. See ya.
Yeah.